happens when the military enters your city not to protect from war, but to control your voice. When protest turns to crackdown and democracy starts to feel like a performance on borrowed time. What happens when the president orders troops onto city streets, not to repel a foreign invader, but to silence voices demanding dignity and justice? When a protest over immigration enforcement in Los Angeles is answered not with dialogue, but with the deployment of 2,000 National Guard troops? This is more than a confrontation. It's a confrontation over identity, power, and belonging in a nation defined by its promise to welcome the weary. What began as a peaceful protest has escalated into scenes of unrest, with burning trash cans, vandalized streets, and masked demonstrators hurling stones. Heavily armed uniformed personnel now patrol the areas they recently cleared using tear gas and rubber bullets. Following several house raids and the arrest of multiple protesters, the streets of Los Angeles bear a striking resemblance to the turmoil witnessed during the Black Lives Matter protests of 2020. But how did this all even happen? The tension started Friday, when Immigration and Customs Enforcement officers and others arrested over 40 immigrants in raids targeting day laborers at a Home Depot parking lot and workers at the Ambience apparel clothing manufacturer, searching for fictitious employee documents. As news of the raids spread fear and panic, relatives and protesters arrived to confront the federal agents wearing camouflage and bulletproof vests. Some protesters tried to stop vehicles carrying detained immigrants or used other methods to block arrests. Soon, the clashes turned violent, with officers using pepper spray and batons, pushing crowds back with riot shields as some protesters fled or retaliated. A prominent labor leader was among those arrested. The protests spread from downtown Los Angeles into the communities of Paramount and Compton, where rumors of arrests also added to the flaring tensions. But what is this ICE? U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement was created in 2003 under the Department of Homeland Security in response to the 9/11 attacks, tasked with enforcing immigration and customs laws to protect national security. Over the years, its role has expanded into one of the most aggressive forms of federal immigration enforcement. ICE has become deeply polarizing. While Democrats criticize its tactics like family separations, midnight raids, and detentions without due process, Trump and his supporters champion it as a symbol of law and order. In his second term, Trump's use of ICE has become questionable over time, with conducting raids in schools, churches, and hospitals, spaces once considered off-limits. Legal safeguards have been stripped back, and ICE now detains even long-time residents without criminal records. This aggressive approach reflects a broader conflict between federal and state power, threatening democratic norms and deepening the national divide. ICE's expanded reach under Trump has devastated many lives. Rosa Mendez, a 38-year-old housekeeper in East LA who had lived in the US for 17 years. She was taken during a routine check-in, leaving behind two daughters, ages 8 and 10, who waited for her outside the ICE office for hours until a passerby called a local church for help. In another instance, Luis Torres, a DACA recipient and college student, was detained after leaving a protest where he had spoken out against ICE raids. Though he had no prior infractions, agents cited association with anti-government activities as a basis for removal proceedings. These are just one of the stories of the victims of ICE. But let's get back to our main story. Within hours, President Trump responded by bypassing California's governor and issuing an executive order invoking Title X, deploying 2,000 National Guard members to Los Angeles. It was the first federal troop deployment in the city without state approval since the federal intervention during the Watts Rebellion in 1965, where President Johnson sent regular army units to restore order during race riots that left 34 dead and 1,000 injured. The president's decision to deploy National Guard troops to California without the explicit consent of the state's Democratic governor has been widely viewed as a direct challenge to state authority and an escalation of partisan conflict. The move, initiated by President Trump, a Republican, was perceived as bypassing Governor Gavin Newsom, a prominent Democrat, and has reignited tensions between the two major political parties and the states. This latest confrontation underscores the deepening divide between the Republican and Democratic parties. In recent years, Partisan battles over federal overreach, state autonomy, immigration policy, and public safety have become increasingly contentious. The deployment order has not only inflamed existing political divisions, but also raised critical constitutional questions about the limits of executive power and the sanctity of federalism in the United States. At a White House press briefing on June 8th, Trump asserted, "We will not tolerate violence or lawlessness in our cities. Los Angeles has become a sanctuary for criminals. These troops are here to restore order." He added that the Guard's presence would protect businesses, protect families, and ensure Americans can walk our streets safely. On the ground, the situation was tense. Guardsmen in camouflaged fatigues patrolled downtown streets under blue lights, standing by as city police confronted demonstrators. Over 50 arrests were made during the first night. Journalists reported that at least one immigrant rights lawyer was detained and held for hours without access to counsel when he attempted to document the arrests. Meanwhile, several older residents staying in a local shelter were temporarily unable to receive medical care when security fencing blocked access to emergency vehicles. The on-camera footage showed protesters arrested, alleged undocumented individuals dragged into the vans, police firing gas shells, and even a journalist being shot in the leg with a rubber bullet. The federal response echoed past conflicts. In 1992, federal troops were deployed in Los Angeles after the Rodney King riots. In 1968, the National Guard marched in Washington, D.C. to quell protests over the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. But this time, the deployment targeted those demanding rights, not the violence that followed military rule. In May and early June, smaller-scale protests had already erupted across California. In Sacramento, university students staged walkouts on May 15th with signs reading "Sanctuary Without Fear." In San Diego and Oakland, community centers organized legal aid stations to warn residents of their rights, educating families who had never before interacted with state authorities. Instead of responding to these grassroots efforts, the administration moved directly to a show of force. The Guard's arrival also triggered backlash within the military. Retired Brigadier General Anthony Ramirez noted in a press interview, "We don't bring troops into city streets unless necessary. This threatens the trust between civilians and the military. It risks turning the people meant to protect into the ones to fear." In addition to the troop deployment, communications blackouts were reported in parts of East Los Angeles, with cellular service irregular or unavailable for several hours. Community activists raised alarms about the impact this had not only on coordinating legal aid, but also on emergency health services. A local nurse reported that 5 migrant patients missed their scheduled dialysis treatments due to canceled rides when communication lines dropped unexpectedly as security checkpoints were set up. By June 10th, as protests continued, Governor Newsom's lawsuit prompted a federal judge to issue a temporary restraining order blocking further troop deployment without state consent. In response, Trump delivered a televised warning promising a dramatic escalation unless local authorities regain control. There are now concerns that this forced confrontation will reach the Supreme Court, potentially reshaping the limits of federal power over state jurisdictions and the role of the military in domestic affairs. Beyond legal battles, the public mood is shifting. According to a June 11th poll by Public Policy Institute of California, 58% of Californians disapprove of the federal troop deployment and 65% oppose ICE's latest round of raids. Meanwhile, grassroots organizing is gaining momentum. Neighborhood watch groups have transitioned into legal aid cells, and clandestine sanctuary networks are forming to protect undocumented families. The next few weeks will determine how this clash ends. Will troops withdraw? Will California's lawsuit succeed? Can legal and civil rights, political pressure, and community solidarity push back against the expansion of military force in U.S. cities? One thing is certain: the lines between military and civilian authority are being redrawn, and democracy itself is on trial.